Hi, this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. It's Friday, May 31st, 2019. And I just want to dispel anybody's idea that they've gotten from Jimmy Dore, Kyle Klinsky, or any of the other my fellow progressives, that there's any validity to this supposed cover-up of a false flag chemical attack on the part of who? I mean, who are they? They're not even really saying who. They're saying like Al-Qaeda affiliated or whatever they want to call them, because it never happened. The fact is that the report that came out condemned the Syrian government, if you want to call it a government, dictatorship, the beast Bashar, as I call him. I mean, here, look at all this red is him dropping bombs on Idlib. He is a terrorist. I mean, I can't even call it state-sponsored terrorism because it's state terrorism. He almost lost this war. So he almost lost the whole country. The whole country was, they, even on this map, they portrayed it as ICE, or IS, Islamic State, ISIS, Islamic State in Syria, ISIL, Islamic State in the Levant. And the fact is, it was Bashar's own fault because he supported ISIL. ISIL is Islamic State in the Levant, as in Iraq. Islamic State in Syria is ISIS, right? And they constantly blame everything on ISIS, whereas ISIS has never really actually carried out a terrorist attack. As a matter of fact, ISIS doesn't even, it supposedly exists in these little gray areas here, but the ISIS that they talk about rarely even participates. And this is here, there's one little thing here. What does it say? HTS. Okay, this is formerly Al-Nusra. So this is the one they claim is ISIS, is Al-Qaeda affiliated. It has no connections to Al-Qaeda. One little guy running away from Afghanistan, ex-member of Al-Qaeda, ended up in Syria, and they said, well, you can join our group and we will keep them off your back, right? And that suddenly made Al-Nusra Al-Qaeda. They practically act like Al-Nusra was Al-Qaeda. Al-Nusra has never done a terrorist attack. You're always going to have some bad people in your groups, right, if you're fighting a war like this here. But so I'm not saying that nobody who ever joined, just like that Al-Qaeda guy who was allowed to join Al-Nusra, sure, you might have somebody bad and they might do something bad and it might get a lot of press, but the fact is HTS, which I can't remember what that means, something to rear sham. They often call it sham. I forget what sham means again. I've studied all this stuff repeatedly, but I can't remember it all. And speaking of that, I've studied these chemical attacks. So what I'm going to tell you is backed by all kinds of articles that I've sourced. I've checked the sources, and I can tell you for sure that the Syrians have used chlorine repeatedly, have used sarin from time to time, some of the more, well, first of all, they're not supposed to have it. Obama was supposed to make them get rid of it. Now, what did they do with it? You know, it's just like with Iraq. They're playing revolving chairs. Of course, Iraq had tons of chemical weapons. So what did they do? Is that they moved it all into Syria. This is what I'm talking about, where Bashar was playing games with the Iraqis, with the former dictator Saddam Hussein. And so these chemical weapons moved from Iraq into here, along with a lot of fighters. So Bashar was doing that. Now, once they were in the country and the war started, and, you know, to give you an example of how Bashar is a terrorist state, you know, this goes back to, you know, the first time his father killed 60,000 people in homes. But when the very beginning, okay, when people were protesting in the streets in 2011, Bashar put the snipers on the roof and started firing, killing, slaughtering people in the crowd. This is the terrorist state. This is Bashar, the beast Bashar, okay? Well, he was basically hosting Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Okay? What we considered to be Al-Qaeda in Iraq, basically religious, supposedly very religious Muslim militants who were fighting the United States Army. Right? This is what resulted in 6,000 combat deaths. And okay, well, Bashar was hosting them, was giving them safe haven in his country. And when Bashar started attacking Sunnis who were peacefully demonstrating, those people became militant against him. They became militant trying to help the people in these areas against Bashar. And then all of a sudden Bashar was like, you know, he liked some of them, he didn't like others, the ones who were upset with him. So, you know, they moved all those chemical weapons into Syria, and then Syria had to get rid of them, and the obvious place for them to go would be to the Russians, right, and their military bases. Okay, it's clear that, and people say, well, but Bashar's winning. Why would he use chemical weapons? It would just work against him. Bullshit. Terror is his main tool. He tries to terrorize everybody, and especially the people fighting against him. I mean, obviously he's terrorizing everybody under his control, but he wants to get everybody, you know, I mean, this has become a face thing, you know, face saving. He wants this tiny piece of Syria, he wants all of Syria under his control again, right? I mean, this is kind of so that he can brutalize the people, and, you know, that's been him and his father's solution from the beginning, is to control everything so he can't get attacked from the outside. So he wants all this back. He wants Kurdish territory all back. He wants anything controlled by the United States, who's protecting what's left, and the Turks, who control Idlib, will protect Idlib. Now today, to me, this is where the war is really getting started again, because right here, the Syrian army, or whoever is working for them, Iranians, and they got all kinds of people in there, the Turks shot down 2 drones over their observation point, and you can't even see their observation point. It's covered up by this. This will go away, and you'll see a little blue dot. The blue dots are Turkish observation points, and these Turkish observation points, and there's one down here too, didn't even exist until a couple weeks ago because the Turks were too afraid to set them up. But the fact is this is all set up as part of the deal, you know, that they made when they came to the ceasefire. But of course the Syrian government has been fucking with the ceasefire from the very beginning. They refused to create a zone outside of Idlib, 13 miles to where they were not allowed to have weapons or soldiers, and the people in Idlib did do that, but then they went back on it because the Syrians went back on it. So, you know, I mean, all this is, it's kind of like looking at Israel-Palestine. When you look at it, the Israelis are always the ones who start everything and create the problems. I mean, 99% of the time, right? The Palestinians are always reacting. Well, the same thing's going on here, is the Syrians provoke, and then, you know, if you listen to the Russian side, all you hear is that, oh, it's the rebels who are doing all the provocation. Well, you don't see, if you keep track, like I do, you don't see the rebels attacking first. You see I mean, look, they've whittled down their territory to Idlib, so obviously. But as far as the chemical attacks go, it's clear the Syrian government does them. It's clear. I mean, why in the hell would the rebels do have an argument for why they wouldn't use chemicals? Because the people of Syria, except for a few idiots who you see on the TV all the time, they always run in and grab these jokers who are pro-Assad. You know, that's like trying to get a perspective on American politics by talking to right-wing conservatives. You know, they're mostly in it for the money, and I'd say the same thing about Syria. So, okay, but as far as this one report, you know, the OPCW or whatever they're called put out their report, and it said it's pretty clear that the Syrian Bashar, the beast Bashar, dropped the bombs, you know, with the gas that killed the people in Douma. I think it was in Douma. Anyway, it was back when, you know, they were fighting over suburbs of Damascus. But anyways, and then one guy who was involved with making the report said, well, it looked like the gas canisters that fell from the sky, clearly, which means it had to be dropped from a plane. It wasn't the kind of thing you could fire, and you know, from the ground to ground. It was air to ground. So that much was clear. But they said, oh, well, there was evidence that they'd been moved. Well, that's really not an issue, because the people who did the report weren't even allowed in there for 3 weeks. So obviously the canisters are going to have been moved and then probably moved back. But the people who live in those apartments, because it didn't destroy the buildings, it was a gas bomb. It didn't blow up the buildings. I mean, yeah, where it made a hole in the roof and fell into the building and then went off, it created damage, which was clear, and that's how they could tell that, you know, it had been dropped from the sky, etc. But yeah, the people are going to move the bomb, you know, from where it's at. They're going to dig it out if it's gotten smashed into stuff and move it. And that's why the people at the, I forget, it was OPWC or whatever it's called. I can never remember all these anonyms or whatever they're called. But, so one guy who's involved with the report says that. And the people who were writing the final report decided that just wasn't really, if anything, it was misleading, as to suggest some kind of cover-up or some kind of false flag attack by the rebels, which they were sure it wasn't. So, I just saw Jimmy Dore last night get on and say, "Oh, you see, we were proved right, and the rebels staged the attack." And I'm like, Jimmy, do you not do your research? You claim to be a better journalist than all the other journalists, but do you not read about the discrepancy? It wasn't a cover-up. It was where they decided that the information was misleading in itself, that there wasn't a false flag attack, that there wasn't, the canisters weren't manufactured by the rebels and brought in and put in the building, and then they, got a whole bunch of actors to pretend like they were gas. There's bodies, there's all kinds of people at the hospitals who can tell you about the people coming in. There's the people who live there. And in a lot of ways, they always say, like, for sure with Kennedy, the cover-up was more damning than the actual event, because, of course, with the cover-up, you can't really know what the actual event was. But then there was a cover-up. The Russians and the Syrians forced the people in that neighborhood to surrender, and then they took control of the area. If anything, they probably moved things around, right? Maybe they moved them, or maybe this would be a likely scenario, right? The people who were bombed take the canister and leave, while the Russians and the Syrians take control. But then when the OPCW or whatever they are comes looking, they quickly bring the canisters back and put them where they were, so that their evidence is back, right? Because the Russians follow the OPCW, whoever they are. I don't know who they are. Okay, I may be getting the letters wrong, but followed them in and wouldn't let them talk to anybody and all this shit. The obvious bullshit. They were obviously guilty, right? And they're just trying to make sure that the OPCW can't just do its job. So, I don't know what guys like Jimmy Dore are trying. I think all he's doing is trying to support Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard made a huge mistake in trying to support the Assad regime. Yes, I understand not being regime change. I'm for regime change. I'm just not for the United States doing it. What I'm not for is the United States getting involved in conflicts simply for money, right? So for oil or what have you. We can get oil and all this kind of stuff with democratically elected governments that represent their people. Just business, right? So there's no way. Don't listen to Kyle or Mike Figueredo or any of these guys if that's what they're going to try and tell you, that there was a false flag attack. They're great progressive pundits, hosts of their shows. They have great shows, but don't expect them to get this right, because they don't understand. And you know, there's 3 million Sunnis packed into Idlib now. There were 23 million of them across all of Syria. And in fact, they're in the Kurdish territories, and they're here and now in Bashar's territories, which were at one time Islamic State in Syria, ISIS. And the rest of them are spread out, you know, as refugees. So there's millions and millions of them, right? So don't expect this to end anytime soon. What are we doing there? The U.S.? God knows. You know, I guess because our allies, Saudi Arabia, is trying to keep them from just being completely wiped out, and I mean, they're the legitimate government of Syria. The people of Syria are the legitimate government of Syria. Any country, the people are the legitimate government of that country. Unfortunately, government in this world has very little to do with the people. The small groups of people within the people have taken over. So anyway, this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News, just trying to get the truth out.